each critic activity is split up into 3 different phases, as you can see here. So the first is the create phase, and then we have the evaluate phase, followed by the feedback phase. So the create phase is essentially just your typical kind of assignment. You can see an objective, some brief instructions, and a rubric right here. So we really believe in rubric learning at Critic. It makes it a lot easier for the students giving the evaluations to have a lot more structure and just ensures a higher level of consistency. So you can see the creation is right here. Students can either submit through a Word box or they can attach a file if they'd like. So now we'll take a look at the evaluate phase. So with the evaluate phase, this is basically your typical kind of peer assessment phase where you're actually conducting the assessments. So you've got the rubric here once again, and you can see that you have an anonymous peer creation right here. So when giving evaluations and receiving evaluations, both steps are totally anonymous just to ensure a higher degree of fairness. And you can see here that the evaluation that you're going to be giving as the student will be comprised of a quantitative aspect, which is the rubric marking, as well as a written evaluation, which is basically going to sum up what the opinions of the evaluator were. It can either be addressed to each individual part of the rubric or just in general. And so something really interesting to note here is if the student just wants to keep it simple and give a quick comment to get it over with, they're actually prompted to leave a longer comment. So that's just one of the safeguards that we have to really ensure that students are pushing themselves beyond their comfort zones. And yeah, you can see there's a schedule right here. So right now it's in the evaluate phase. Every time a new phase is entered, students will be given an email notification. And if they're interested, they could subscribe to a text notification as well. So now we go to the feedback stage, which is really kind of novel to Critic. And this is where basically students are going to be completing the feedback loop and actually giving some comments about what they thought about the evaluations that they received. So here you see there are 2 scales. There's a motivational scale as well as a critical scale. And here students are just going to be grading what they thought of the written comments that they received on both of these metrics. So something to keep in mind here is that when students are doing this, they haven't actually yet seen their creation score, which becomes available to them once they finish completing their feedback. And so this is really another step to make sure that students are actually conducting the feedback step before they have any sort of bias based on what mark they ended up getting. So you see here, you can either check out the class average or dispute your score if you'd like. And so this is a feature that the student would use if they feel like the creation score that they were given was not reflective of the work that they'd completed. And then the professor would just be prompted that a student's disputed their score, and they'll have the opportunity to override the score or leave it as it is. So something to note about this creation score is that it's actually not a straight average of all the evaluations that a student's received, but rather a weighted average based on the grading power that each student evaluating them has. So grading power is another novel feature that's Critic's. And essentially, based on how good of an evaluator a student is, they'll have their own respective grading power. So we can see here, peer evaluator number 1 has 6 stars grading power, whereas peer evaluator 2 only has 4 stars, and peer evaluator 3 just has the 1 star. So this will actually mean that the evaluation received from peer evaluator 3 will have much less of an impact on the student's grade. And so this brings us to how we actually get a baseline for these grading powers, which really comes down to this calibration activity that you're going to give out to your students at the beginning of the term. So now we're going to take a look at things from the professor's perspective. We're just going to start with the calibration activity and give you an idea of how those grading powers find their baseline. So the first thing you're going to do, the first activity you're going to conduct is going to be a calibration activity. So as you can see here from the schedule, there's only one phase of a calibration activity, and that's the evaluate stage. So what you're going to do here is pick 3 different assignments. One's going to be the really high quality one kind of middle range, and then one that's on the lower side of the quality. And what you're going to do is evaluate those 3 assignments and then give the students an opportunity to evaluate the same 3 assignments. So if we just click Blake's responses here as an example, you're going to see that they got an evaluation score on the calibration activity of 86%, which resulted in them getting +3 grading power stars. So If we take a look at the second evaluation, we'll see that the student score was 4 stars here. So that's what Blake gave, whereas the mark that the professor gave was only 3 stars. So that's what led to this overall grading score for this evaluation being 79%. And based on however close the students are to your evaluations, they're going to get this kind of initial start to their grading power, which will then be adjusted throughout the term based on how closely they're evaluating it to the class average. So if one student decides they're just going to give out 4-star reviews, they're actually not going to benefit their grading power, which is going to consistently be dropping throughout the term. So the next thing to take a look at is this grading phase. So this comes after the students finish their feedback stage, and it's available exclusively to you as the professor. And what's going to happen here is you're going to get to see the progress of the students. So you'll see that John Smith missed 1 evaluation, Sarah missed 1 creation. And if you'd like, you can even go to scoring here and actually filter the students based on how they performed. So if I just click that, that'll show me right at the top the students that maybe need a little bit more attention. And as you could maybe imagine, the student that got the worst grade actually disputed it. So if I'd like to take a look at that dispute, I can just click that there. And the fact that it's red means it hasn't yet been addressed. So disputes are only being used in about 2 to 4% of cases, which is something that we're really proud of. It really goes to show that students are content with the evaluations that they're receiving, and that this kind of additional feedback that they're getting and having it come from their peers is really going a long way in terms of making sure that they're satisfied with the marks that they're ending up with. So once I'm here, I can manage the dispute or edit the score. So the first thing I'm going to want to do is take a look at her work, and then edit the score based on whatever I think is appropriate. So if I think she deserved 3 stars in content, I'll go there. And then I'll have the chance to manage the dispute and just write some comments back to Maria and let her know why I changed or did not change her overall creation score. So this takes us to the create activity view. So as you can see here, we've been spending most of our time today looking at the individual activities, and we've also seen how calibration activities serve as a baseline for the grading power. And now we're going to take a quick look at group activities. So you can see here the 2 options are between groups or within group. So between groups is for your typical kind of group work setting. So what's going to happen is me and my group are going to complete our assignment, and then individually afterwards, I'm going to evaluate other groups on how I felt their assignments did. Whereas the within group is kind of for after a group activity has been completed. A group and their group members will get the opportunity to evaluate each other on their performance to make sure everyone has a good idea of how their contribution was viewed within the group. So this is also going to be anonymous on the first side. So students are going to know who they're evaluating, but they're not actually going to know which comments came from which students. So now all that's really left to talk about is the discussion board. So if we take a look here, you can see that it's been designed to look similar to a kind of social media platform where the students can have a post, they can ask a question, they can include a poll if they'd like, and they can ask anonymously. And something really interesting to note about this discussion board feature is this concept of a reputation score. So basically students will have their engagement to the discussion board quantified based on how often they post, how many kind of likes they're receiving, and how many comments they're getting back in return. And so this is another fun way to kind of quantify the students' engagement and make sure they're getting a more accurate and reflective participation mark as well.